Yeah. Thanks for the invite to talk to you today. My name is David, and I'm a senior researcher at the Technical University of Denmark in the Department of Wind Energy in the Society, Market and Policy section. And what I do in my everyday life is broadly dealing with issues of planning processes for wind farms and social issues of social acceptance and also related issues to that. And in my short presentation today, I will move a little beyond the issue and the topic of recycling and provide some thoughts about the social, legislative, and spatial aspects of decommissioning. And first, I would like to show a picture, and this comes with an anthropology, I must say, for drawing on that picture, and again, because I guess we have all seen it, but it's really a case in point for how certain representations of challenges can trigger also a change of discourse, really, but also how a distorted public image can be created. And I was at the EOLIS, at the End of Life of Energy Conference in Brussels last autumn, and various presentations there actually have drawn on and referred to that image and this article in Bloomberg to illustrate the urgency to advance recycling of wind turbine blades and what this actually means for the image of the wind industry as such. But what they didn't show in the presentations, and what also the article doesn't really show, is the context of this picture from the US, where there are no bans on landfill for turbine blades, where the cost of recycling is much lower, where the cost of recycling is much higher than for landfills, but also where the expected amount of blade waste by 2050 would also only represent less than 1% of the landfill capacities that are available in the US, as a recent study has also shown. So, but all of this actually shows that there are not so many incentives to advance the recycling process as such. So what I wanted to show here is really that context matters. And I'll now talk a bit more about the European context of decommissioning and discuss a few implications here. And while some of this may not really be new for you, I hope that I can raise the awareness of some novel issues here as well. So when it comes to the regulatory framework in Europe for decommissioning of wind turbines, there's actually no common international framework. Therefore, decommissioning is really dealt with within the national and local legislation and policies related to dismantling process, the resource management, waste management, and also the site restoration. But some of those elements are also embedded in EU directives and EU actions, for example, for waste and circular and economy. And that's why there are also several guidelines, national guidelines, handbooks, and reports specifying good practices and standards and obligations related to decommissioning of wind turbines. So, and therefore, there are different policies that steer and guide the decommissioning of wind turbines and also utilize different tools that can be roughly summarized in three types, I would say. First, we have resource management, which guides and regulates the treatment of different resources and different components of wind turbines. Then we have environmental impact assessments that include specifications of decommissioning plans and the site restoration of particular wind farm projects. And they also often include some ambitions and intentions for recycling certain parts as well. And in some cases, for example, in the UK, projects also require a reassessment prior to the start of the dismantling and decommissioning process, which may also include new approvals by the local planning authorities. And as a third way, or a third legal measure, is that it refers to some guarantees that are necessary to ensure that the financing and the responsibilities for future decommissioning are clear and are in place. So, which includes financial bonds, then financial guarantees, but also deposits. Then an overarching theme is, of course, the restoration of the sites where wind turbines are located. And this is usually regarded as the overall and implicit goal of decommissioning as well. So, and again, there's no one legislation on what site restoration might mean or what it might imply. This is also handled differently in different national contexts. And the practicalities and the objectives and the underlying obligations can be legally anchored either in the EIAs, so the environmental impact assessments, landowner and the agreements, or land use contracts, then the permits and licenses that have been created during the planning process, or site restoration can also be imposed by municipal conditions, so by local planning authorities, and this also then includes the grade or the degree of restoration. And for example, Wind Europe states the goal of greenfield sites as the kind of the ambition for restoration, but it does not explicitly explain what this actually means and how this should be done. But it provides a step-by-step guidance towards that. And some countries also have specific or specifications for excavation depths, which depend on different land uses, for example, in France. And but the challenge here is really that it does not only apply to the actual spots, so where the wind turbine is located, where the foundations are, but also to access roads, cable routes, and all related infrastructures, which becomes more challenging for offshore areas, and of course, and also might not be desired as such. For example, when we think of new habitats, new environmental habitats that have been kind of emerged and developed over time. So then another topic, blade recycling. I won't talk much about that because there are other experts here in the room to talk about that. And I'm sure that most people in the room are well aware of the challenges here. But I would like to point out two things, though. One is this kind of self-imposed landfill ban by 2025 as proposed by Wind Europe and as well, whereas the wind industry has actually taken the driver's seat, so the pilot seat, in order to influence policy and legislation, which is really great. And second, also the current policy considerations regarding recycling and landfill and so on is really drawing on this polluter pays principle and the notion of extended producer responsibility, meaning that also, which is also used in the EU waste policies as such, so which both imply kind of a shift of responsibilities for taking care of the waste towards the producer or the operator of the wind farm. And this could well be an adequate tool in the absence of more economic incentives to recycle composite materials. And then maybe a rather novel topic or issue. In contrast, social considerations have not really gained much attention when it comes to the decommissioning of wind turbines and wind farms as such. Of course, decommissioning and recycling are not just a matter of kind of an image or reputation when it comes to the sustainability of wind energy. It's also a matter of change, and it's about the implications of spatial changes when wind turbines disappear in a local area, similar to when they are planned. So there could be similar challenges and similar issues. And the communication during the planning process, when wind farms are planned and developed, they usually entail promises that the site would be reversed to a certain state, and it applies some sort of reversibility later on. But it's not quite clear what that reversibility might mean and how it actually ends up in the end, and what it might mean in the eye of local people living near a wind farm project, whether this is still desirable. And similarly, as I put down here as well, there may be some socio-economic relations between the wind farm neighbors and the wind farm as such that have been established and created over time. When we think about like community benefit schemes, like in the UK, where the local communities economically benefit from a wind farm project in their neighborhood, or maybe income from shared ownership of wind farms, which would then also end once the operation ends of the wind farm. So there might be some socioeconomic relations that also are affected by the disappearance and the dismantling of the wind farm as such. And such aspects could be considered more in some areas in terms of the social closure of planning, as we would call it. And then there are also issues maybe related to natural heritage and the local legacy that the wind turbines create in an area which are not fully considered either. And in order to explore the meaningness and the relevance and the impacts of these questions, it would be necessary to engage with the local communities on the site and engage them before the decommissioning process. And as I said, we don't really know much about all these aspects, but they become more and more important, I would say, with the end of life of wind turbines and also the disappearance or the re-emergence of new wind turbines in the same area when it comes to repowering. This is my last slide now. Just a few reflections at the end. First, decommissioning should be seen as part of a wider restoration process. This means that the different decommissioning practices and logistics and innovation should be also considered in a holistic way, including positive and negative impact, as we have also seen earlier. And second, there's necessarily a time gap between the decommissioning plan outlined during the EIA process, and which is also verified by building permits and licenses and so on, and the actual date or the time when the dismantling process and the decommissioning process is taking place. And this means that environmental impact assessments, like the legislation, standards and so on, and decommissioning practices might have changed over time. They might have improved, new innovations came in, and so on. So things have changed over time for the past 20, 25 years during the operation of the wind turbines. And this means that this might also then require new and more detailed assessments prior to the decommissioning, or even EIAs for the decommissioning process, as some research would also suggest or propose. And then another point is that there are different ways to secure the financial resources for decommissioning at the beginning during the planning process by the wind farm operators. But there's also an increasing necessity for more flexibility given the developer diversity that we see consortia or partnership for large offshore wind farms, the transfer of ownership during the operation of the, or after the building of the wind farm and so on, especially for onshore again. But also, as I said, when it comes to larger consortia for offshore wind farms, when it comes to liabilities and responsibilities. And as I said, important point is there's really a lack of consideration on integration of more social implications of decommissioning beyond health and safety issues in terms of how local communities have engaged with the operational wind farm in their everyday life and how this might be affected when the wind turbines disappear. And this may even become more relevant in the future when more and more wind farms are decommissioned and repowered. And then, as we also heard earlier, there's really a need for an international harmonization of good practices in order to streamline the approaches and to deal with the increasing amount of wind turbines. And also, as mentioned earlier, there's really a need for a market for composite materials, blade recycling, but also reuse and repurposing. Yeah, those were my words. Just to provide you with a slightly different perspective, and happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, David.